Hey, I'm CaptainPira, and this is my first ever part 2 video for the making of Megaera from the Hades game. And this video is even better because I am actually in the finished cosplay. The last video was showing the undersuit, the leggings, and the toga. This video we're onto the armor, so the shins... Oh my gosh, I am causing an earthquake. The pauldrons, the collar, the diadem, and the whip. It's also like the hairpin that I no longer have because I lost it in the shoot today, but I'll show you all of that. Come with me.
For my shin guards, I start by tracing off the lower leg of my tights pattern. Then, I move the front center of the design to the center of my pattern. Using this as my pattern, I cut out the foam to be about 5mm smaller on all sides. To join the two, I use barge, but a spray adhesive might work better for this step. When the fabric and foam are both coated, I press them together, then place flat, heavy weights on them overnight. In this case, I used some fabric bins. When they're bonded, I trim the curves and glue the edges down. Because I didn't use spray adhesive and brushed my glue on each side separately, there's some bubbling when my shin guards lay flat, but thankfully it disappears when they curl. I'm adding eyelets to the edges so I can lace them at the back. I'll get to making the skulls soon, but for joining them, I chose to glue rope to the inner back, then used a curved needle to stitch them to the shin guards. Using scrap paper and my measuring tape, I get a feel for how big to make my pauldrons. I transferred this to pattern paper and rough out the shape. It was sitting too horizontal, so I cut out a dart to help it curve. When my shoulder's good, I use it and the shirt to determine the front panel. Next I'm making my spikes. The cones I used on my Junkrat tire had nice proportions, so I roll one over my paper to take its pattern. This is massive to wear, so I made a series of smaller cones using the same angle but smaller radius. Once I've got my pattern, I transfer the main shapes to 5mm EVA foam. I heat it to seal the pores, then use a Dremel to bevel the edges.
So I've got my general pieces assembled, and I was going to start painting, but I need my cones sorted out first. This is from my Junkrat tire, and I was using it for reference for a good cone proportion, but it is huge. This was a little closer. I'd cut one of these fairly large guys for the front center, flanked on each side by a little bit smaller one. And then these wee babies, just to flesh things out. There should be 2 of them on each end of each side.
I've made an army of cone templates, so I can test the scale against my pauldrons. When the selection is made, I cut them out of 2mm craft foam, leaving a tab at one side. Then, I glue the tab and the underside of the untabbed edge, and press them together to make the cone. The armor has a lip around the edge, so I cut strips of my 5mm foam. I spread barge on the back of the strips, as well as the edges of the armor. Then, starting with the inner edge, join them together. The diadem is much smaller, so to create its raised edge, I'll be cutting away at the negative space instead. Back to dremeling. I could have beveled my trim before applying it, but because I rounded the edges on the armor earlier, I wanted to make sure the 2 curves worked together. Then, I heat seal the newly exposed edges. While the Dremel is out, I smooth out the lip on the cones where they close as well. There were a few gaps on the beveling and places I accidentally nicked with the Dremel, so I patched them up with polyfill spackling. It dries fast but has no flexibility, so I wouldn't recommend this for larger pieces or areas that would be under stress.
Okay, my armor is mostly done. I just need to add my cones to my shoulder pieces. And they don't sit flat, but these need to be at the exact curve they'll be when they're on my body, otherwise there'll be gaps and tearing. Put it on and then I'll figure out where my spikes are going. and how to lay them as flat as possible. But that's going to be really difficult to do on me, so time to clean up my mannequin.
I cut a small curve from the bottom of each cone to help it sit well against the curve of the shoulder. Ideally, all bottom edges should be flush. When I'm satisfied, I coat the bottom of my cone with barge, then attempt to make a similar circle on the pauldron to join them. When everything is attached, it's finally time to seal it. For this, I'm using Flexbond since I'm not sure how much the shoulders will bend during wear. To keep things flexible, I forgo spray paint and use acrylics. Metallics tend to be thin and require multiple coats. Even after a second coat, my brush marks are still quite visible in the distribution of pigment, even though the texture was smooth.
Okay, so here's my shoulders after 2 coats of paint. It looks pretty good from far away, like I've been testing in the mirror for about a 10-foot distance. It just reflects so well on camera, but it's still looking a little patchy in places to my own eye. Up here. Okay, so my armor is all painted now. I just need the loops to join the pauldrons to the front and back panels. And in the art, it's big metal loops, and I have some big metal loops, which I thought would work great, except that it's meant for light fixtures and supporting like 50 pounds of weight, so they don't really twist open very well. And neither do my plastic backup chains, so I might as well go with my original, I think these are for purses, because at least they're the right color, but what I'm going to need to do instead is poke a hole into my foam where I want it to go, cut open until the hole, insert my chain bit, glue it shut with barge, and hope that that's strong enough.
To get my square rings in, I create a hole with my awl. Then cut to that point in my armor. Place the ring in, glue both sides, and press together. This might have been less visible if done at an earlier stage, but I also would have got paint on my rings. My tiara gem is painted with nail polish, but I'd love to replace it with the Swarovski later. To wear it, I used jump rings to join short lengths of gold chain to each side, the ends of which will have hairpins. I might also use spirit gum to the back of the tiara if it doesn't prove strong enough. The base of my collar uses the McCall's M7306 pattern. Initially, I tried to make my panels even by using a uniform pattern, 1 centimeter at the neck and 1 inch at the bottom. But they skewed too quickly. For take 2, I started from the shoulder and center and back, and evenly divided until things were a good size. I also merged the front and back patterns into one piece and cut the base out of my gold vinyl, as well as half of the pattern out of foam. Then cut each panel to paint with blue metallic acrylic. Since there's a checker pattern to them, I need to paint the front of every even square on the lower ring and the back of every odd, flipping that for the higher ring. It took 3 or 4 coats of alternating brush strokes to get an even coverage. Before I can add these decorations, the collar needs finished. The neck piece is lined with blue spandex for extra strength, top stitched, then sewn to the broader bib.
So here's the progress on my collar. The neck was wrinkling when I was testing it, so I've backed it with spandex to give it a little more strength to its shape. Right now, the collar bib kind of piece looks a bit like a circle skirt with a waistband, because that's more or less what it is. It is a little hard to get it to lay properly flat so far, but 1, it will be underneath my other armor, and 2, the beads and matting are made out of foam, so I think that should help give it some structure.
My blue panels need to alternate, and to make sure I've maintained the correct order and orientation during painting, I lined them up on the collar. Then, I slowly hand stitch them on at each corner, alternating top and bottom to keep the spacing right. When they're all on, the collar just needs the gold row between panels and at the bottom edge. This I thought would be machine sewable, but the middle row proved difficult for my machine, so back to hand stitching it is.
Okay, so it took so much hand sewing, but my collar is built. So I hand stitched the foam in the corners, but I am going to have to be careful it doesn't tear. I might go back and do a little glue in between these bigger panels. And then the sewing machine it was already having a time with this fabric. With the foam on top of it, it was just a little too much, so after the first couple of inches, I started hand sewing it. I think the effect turned out really nice. If I have these near the edges. My other concern is how much it separates at the back. I don't want an awkward flesh panel in the back because my arms are going to be covered in sleeves and my face is going to be painted a kind of gray blue, and I don't want to just have one spot I can barely reach in my back that I'm going to have to get with face paint. I'm going to need to put a snap here and here, and ones along the top once I decide which side is up.
To sculpt the skulls at the top of the Shin Cards, I started with 2 halves of styrofoam ball. Then I take a fistful of air dry foam, divide it in half, and roll it out. When it's smooth, I smush it over the half ball and roughly shape the jaw and eyes with my hands. Then, using a sculpting tool, I define the brow ridge, nose, and mouth. After they dried, one of my eye holes was getting thin, so I backed it with hot glue for strength. Then I coat the entire thing in white glue, since it shouldn't be bending and the foam is already pretty stiff. At some point along the way, I 3D modeled and printed a bunch of bits for Meg, mostly on the resin printer. There was an issue on printing that caused some unexpected holes, but I didn't want to waste materials, so I filled the hole with more spackling. Because it was out. You probably shouldn't use this with bare hands. I also need to sand all the bumps off surfaces that had supports. Now that all my solid pieces are prepped, I can spray paint them gold. When things have dried, I start distressing. This helps to bring all the golds closer in color, as well as making the armor look older and lived in. Here, I mix black and brown acrylic, apply it thickly, then attempt to rub most of it off with paper towel. This leaves the deeper areas a darker color. The pommel of the whip has blue stripes like the collar, so I tape the edge of the band and then freehand the stripes. It takes 2 coats to be noticeable. The guard is also 2 different colors. Being careful to avoid the gold division line, I paint the outer edges with brown acrylic, then the center with hot pink nail polish. I also use nail polish for the gold squares on the pommel because it would be hard to get the proper coverage with the thin acrylic. Once these are dry, I also distress them to match. The whip also has a grip between the guard and the pommel. It seems like wood in the refs, so while I'm sanding off the major bumps of my print, some texture should work in my favor. When smooth, I bond them with Gorilla Glue superglued and brace them together for 24 hours. A bit more sanding is needed to make sure the ends of the grip fit snugly into the openings on the guard and pommel. When it's just able to fit together, I superglue the ends and wedge them tight. Then, I paint the exposed edges brown and distress this as well. To make the tail of my whip, I wanted something strong for the core but still flexible. There was a lot of twine that didn't work out for a previous project, so I decided on grouping strands of that. The opening in my handle was a little larger than 4 strands, so I made 2 long strands and 2 slightly shorter ones, and welded them together at the base with duct tape, adding additional bonds every few inches. The outer side of the tail needs to be pink, so I'm using leftover hot pink satin ribbon. It's a little slippery and thinner than ideal, but it's what I had. My lengths were determined by my leftovers, so one strand was longer than the other. I placed them both with their midpoints at the end of the rope. From here, it was wrapped with a 4-strand braid technique. The ribbons weren't long enough, so as each ended, I taped the ends down and swapped in a length of pale pink ribbon. When the full length of rope was braided, I hot glued the base and wedged it into my handle. I actually think this turned out pretty rad. The last prop is Sharon's oval, and it just needs a pin back glued on so I can wear it on the collar. To start, I rough out the shape of my wings on 2 large sheets of paper, then refine the details and cut out.
Okay, so I have my wing pattern, So I got this, I think, on the way home from ColossalCon a few years ago, and it was on sale, which I have a lot of trouble passing up. It's not necessarily a huge bargain so much as we can't get these fabrics in Canada, so it's hard to say no. But I don't know if half a yard is going to be enough for these wings, so let's find out. Probably not.
Half a yard is too small to fit a whole wing, but I'm willing to accept some patchwork to be able to use this fabric. Both sides of the wings are asking too much though, so I also patched together scraps left over from my Andrea cosplay to make the other side. Then, I clip them together and sew along all the edges except where it meets my back. I turn it right side out before snipping the curves, and you can see a huge difference between the before and after.
So I've got the inside and the scalier side on the outside, but it's really flat and limp. So for my main structure, I'm going to be using this copper piping because it's surprisingly light. It's hollow, so it's a little bit flexible, but not super flexible. And to keep it from being too flat, where the fingers are, I'm going to try and fill in with cotton batting.
To give my wings structure, I used copper tubing because it's flexible and strong. In the past, it's worked for foam wings, but ultimately gave me some trouble with this build, so use with caution.
So this is the biggest wireframe I've actually used for the wings, and it's asymmetrical, so this is going to need a harness. This is the loop, because I tried bending it here and that made that too unstable, so this needs to be mostly straight and go straight up, so I thought this would be good to press against my back. But I'm going to have to get something that holds it on two sides so that this doesn't lose all of its shape.
I also stuffed the wings where the bones would go. I'd meant to stuff them lighter, but with the narrow tubes I had trouble with the batten bunching. When it's fully stuffed, I can put in my tubes.
So now it's all stuffed, and I like the look, but it's even heavier. I'm really going to have to rethink my support system, because this is pretty sad. But if I get some kind of plastic tube, it only really needs the support for maybe 12 inches.
Mostly this wig was styled off camera because there's still a struggle for me. Fortunately, Arta linked a tutorial for Kaisa who has almost the same style, and I was able to follow that. I'll link it below. For her hairpiece, I measured the circumference of the ponytail and used that length by the desired height of the holder to make a rectangular pattern. I transferred that to foam and coat it with a scrap of gold stretch vinyl. To give it a beveled edge, I glue some rope to each edge between the foam and the vinyl and press the edges carefully together. When the barge has dried, I wrap it around the ponytail and stitch it shut. You could use glue, but I didn't want to risk getting any in the wig. Now it just needs the bangs and baby hairs trimmed, so I put it on to be sure the lengths are right. My ponytail was a little flat, so I tried to tease more volume into the base. I didn't really want to make her wear gloves, but painting hands is also a bad time, so here they are. To start, you trace your hands on the parchment side of freezer paper, finger splayed. Then, you iron the wax side of the paper to the wrong side of your stretch fabric, in this case power mesh. Then, you want to pin it to a second layer of your fabric so it doesn't shift when sewing. With the freezer paper still whole and pinned to 2 layers of fabric, sew along your tracing. I always give a little extra space, but you need to be sure to leave enough space between lines that you can trim down to the base of your fingers, otherwise you'll get a bunchy webbed finger result. When you've sewn your whole hand, you can tear away the perforated paper and test your fit. If your hand can get in comfortably, you're probably safe to trim off the excess, leaving a tiny seam allowance. Then, turn the right side out and they're good to go. These are supposed to be hands rather than gloves, so they need one last step: fake nails. I put tape over my own nails to protect them, then put on the gloves, glue where my nails are, and then press the fake nails in place. All done!
So Zag, we meet again. Looking for a little more fun. So in review, the undercollar sits a lot better than I had expected. These flip up a little, so if I want to avoid that, I could use a spray adhesive, or I could, I guess, put another stitching tack around the middle, but it doesn't really bother me too much since it's also under the shoulder armor. This ended up bothering me a little more because as I wore it, well, it's kind of warm out, it was losing some of the curve in the shoulders, meaning that it didn't like stay in place as well and was sliding off a lot more easily. So I'd probably get either like a snap or Velcro or something just to adhere this to the collar. I don't want to make it permanent because like walking back from the shoot today, I wanted to be able to just take this off and carry it in my arms. So I wouldn't really have that option if I had to take off the whole collar too. The tiara I'm pretty happy with. I would swap out this gem, but it's lightweight, it moves around, but kind of goes back to the same place. It's just got a hairpin on each side of the chain to keep it on, and that has not been any problem at all, which is great because there's enough else to deal with this costume. My leg armor did end up a little bit too long, which means that when I move my foot, it creates wrinkles throughout here and here. So that's not ideal. But in general, they were pretty easy, they're pretty comfortable to wear, and they just needed some extra long laces to do up at the back. I also made the wing, but it doesn't really stay up for a long period of time, and it messes up my shoulders real bad. To make a proper harness for this, I was just shoving this in a corset and it worked at home, but once I tried to put everything on at once, it would fall over and take out all of my armor with it. So that was really unfortunate to find out during a shoot. On top of not being able to support the wings in the end, wearing the corset with this makes it a lot harder to move. So leaning over to pick up things and adjust things is just all made that much harder. Although I think that the main issue was still that this pipe is too flexible. So I probably want to get some tubing instead, but I'll definitely have to do a full body test before I take it out next time. My gloves don't quite match my face in real life, but in photos, they're not too bad. The same as my arms. If I did want to make them a little closer, I could go in with some blue or an airbrush, which is a lot more work, and you'd have to put something in between it so that it doesn't blow right through to the other side. But I think this is passable. So this video got delayed because I was getting my wisdom teeth out, and it took me like 2 weeks to properly recover because I'm way older than you're supposed to be to get your wisdom teeth taken out. But while I was recovering, I also started working on some other cosplays that I wasn't filming because I looked horrible. And it's just so much more relaxing to not feel like someone is watching your every move. So I'll probably stick to doing bigger projects off camera, and if anyone has an interest in something that I've made on my Instagram, feel free to ask me questions there. And if there's like a ton of questions, I can do a breakdown video after the fact. At the end of the last video, I said Thanos instead of Thanatos, and no one's called me on that, so either you're all very forgiving or you're just as mush-brained as I am at this point. Either one is acceptable, don't worry. My next video should probably be for my Femdever suit, based on fan art that I cannot find the source of for the life of me. So that'll be a nice simple one, I think. A nice break from armor and such. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. Please like or sub or leave me a comment. Tell me how you would have done this all better. Give me tips on wing harnesses because I apparently do not got that. See you next round, Sag. Thanks for watching. Bye.